You're listening to Talking to Teens, where we speak with leading experts from a variety of disciplines about the art and science of parenting teenagers. I'm your host, Andy Earle. We are here today with Megan Maas. She is an award-winning researcher who studies adolescent sexual socialization. Specifically, she looks at how social media, sexting, and online pornography work together to influence the attitudes and behaviors of teenagers with regard to their sexuality and gender. We're going to be talking today about a topic that, according to Megan's research, only 7% of parents have spoken to their teenagers about, but it is a critical topic. Let's jump in to some of Megan's research on porn, sexting, social media, and teenage sexuality. Megan, thank you so much for coming on the show today. You kind of research a topic that is maybe an unconventional topic to research, or is kind of a taboo topic. And so I'm really interested. What compelled you to devote your career to studying porn and internet sex and online sexting and all of the things that you are doing in your work?
Yeah, all the scandalous things that teenagers do on the internet, right?
All this stuff that nobody wants to talk
I
about. You're like,
know.
hey, let's jump right into it.
I think that is actually part of it, is that I'm sort of, it's a personality of trait of mine that I've always been one, even I guess apparently as a little kid, to sort of acknowledge the elephant in the room or talk about things that people aren't comfortable talking about. So I think there's somewhat of like something in my personality that's kind of drawn to that type of thing. So, for example, when I was at one point, when I knew that I was interested in psychology, I was also really interested in like death and the process of all of that, and that's another topic that we don't really talk about. And
Yeah.
so I think there's a little bit of that. I wish I had a really great story to tell to answer that question because it's really been a cumulative snowball kind of a deal where certainly my own experiences growing up in our culture, being a girl and a woman, and experiencing like our sexualized media and being really confused by, those messages versus messages I was receiving from like my mom, which were really positive, versus messages I was receiving from like church, which were really negative. And so just really trying to put it all together myself, I guess. And then, with pornography in particular, because most of our, our sort of foundations about how young people learn about behavior is mostly through observation. I mean, there's certainly through other forms as well, but we observe how other people act. And so we learn how to be friends by watching other friendships, and we learn how to be, employees by watching other employees. And the only place we really see sex, like actual sex, is in pornography. I mean,
Right.
certainly we see, in films they can allude to, sex happening, or
Sure.
we see everything leading up to sex. And so, um,
Artistic sex.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah. And so it just kind of, it seemed silly to be interested in romantic relationships and sexual health and sexual behavior and media influences of that behavior and not be investigating pornography.
Okay, so I'm trying to picture in my head. Maybe you could walk me through how one actually studies porn. Are we like we're bringing people into the lab and we're saying, oh, hey, we're going to show you a video, and then blam, it's porn, or we're watching their reactions, or we're putting them an MRI and we're just blam showing them some porn and then seeing what happens in their brain, or that's probably not going to get approved by the IRB, huh? So, I mean, how do you actually go about investigating this, and especially teenagers who are not supposed to even be engaging in that?
Yeah. So there are researchers who do put participants in the lab, invite participants in the lab and show them porn clips and view their brains through fMRI technology and use like plasma graphs to measure how aroused their genitals are, and then they can
Sure.
self-report how aroused they are and things like that.
Little
My
knob.
Yep,
Like,
yep.
whoa.
Yep. And as you can imagine, the majority of this research is done in Canada and in European countries. It's not
Yeah,
really done
right,
in the US a whole lot. It's expensive to do, and you pretty much nailed it. We can't do it with teens, and
right.
I don't think we will be able to anytime soon. And so that presents a pretty big gap in the research,
Yeah,
for sure, that is unfortunate in some ways, but certainly we want to be as ethical as we can. So most of my research just relies on self-report, which can also be problematic, or college students and teens reporting on how much pornography they've seen or what they've seen, at what age they've seen it, how they use it, their attitudes towards it, that type of thing. So through surveys and interviews and focus groups.
okay, I hear that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, that's got to be hard. It's kind of one of those awkward things to talk about, and probably we always assume with our alcohol research that it's always underrepresented in those kind of surveys, just by default, because the kids just are skeptical of a survey that comes from adults and is asking them about stuff they're not supposed to be doing or engaging in or whatever. So
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one of the best studies that we have, that was conducted by a phenomenal team. It is our only, that I'm aware of, our own nationally representative study. So where the sampling was done pretty well, with actual adolescents, like I think as young as 11, but they asked them about their online experiences over the phone. And as you can imagine, so we do have some social desirability in answering, surveys that are relatively anonymous. But phone calls, I think, would probably even add more pressure, particularly if parents
yeah,
are
right.
around or in the same
And like,
room.
can Dad hear me while I'm saying this? Okay, yes, I have watched porn, but don't tell my parents.
Right?
Yeah,
So
totally.
so it's hard. And of course those statistics coming from those studies tend to be on the more conservative side than some other studies. Uh
Yeah,
but we also want to be cautious that the way that other studies are conducted have their flaws as well, in terms of convenient sampling and things like that. So the science is kind of a mess at this point when it comes to research on teen porn use, at least. So the under 18 crowd.
so, okay, you mentioned the statistics are a little bit low in some of those, especially the phone ones, but I mean, what kind of statistics are we talking about here? Is this something like 10% of teenagers are doing, or is this something like 5% of teenagers are doing, or
Well, so research does show, even though the statistics do vary quite a bit, most studies will show that up to 90% of boys by the age of 17 and up
Ooh,
to 60% of girls by the age of 17 have at least seen it. Now, this is just
yeah,
being like exposed on the bus,
sure,
stumbling upon it online, what have you. It's more like 5 to 30% of the 8 to 12 crowd, with the 30% being more unintentional exposure, and that 5% being more like they were seeking it out online, they Googled it or what have you. But in terms of like weekly use, monthly use, or exposure, those statistics are kind of all over the place. But we can
Sure.
sort of rely on about a third of adolescents in high school are using porn pretty regularly, and more than half, are seeing it quite a bit, and almost all have seen it, at least once.
So then, where do parents fit into that? Or is there any data on like it's so 90% of kids, the males at least, have seen or at least admit that they've seen or been exposed to it. So is that about the same? About 90% of parents, have talked to their kids about porn and have like had conversations about it, or is that more like kind of 80%, or it's a little lower than that, or what?
We're talking like 7%, like seven,
Wow.
seven. That's what we
So we
found.
got some work to do,
Yeah,
parents.
yep. In a study that we did of over 2,000 college students, we found that only 7% had parents who ever discussed pornography with them.
Wow. Okay. So if you're
But
hearing this
yeah,
and you're like, "Well, I haven't done that," you're not alone.
no, you're not alone. Nope, but we do have some work to do. You're not alone. But yeah, it's time to change that for sure.
Is porn really that bad?
That's a good
I mean,
question.
they're going to be curious about it. Maybe it's better to like be exposed to it before you just find yourself in a sexual situation and have no idea, how things work down there and all that. Um, are there benefits to porn? What do we know about kind of how it actually what the effects are on kids?
Well, so there's actually a few questions in that that
Okay.
I can sort of walk through. And I would first want to start off with saying that really wondering, is it all that bad, is actually a great first step in terms of acknowledging just how normal it is to be sexual as a teenager, and to be curious about sex, and to want to see naked people, and even to want to watch people have sex. That's completely natural. And, we've always had sexual content, although it's really more like erotica, which means sex depicted in art, throughout almost every civilization has had that. Pornography, which the Greek root words mean photograph of a prostitute. We really have only had since photography, so the late 1800s, and then really since photography became cheaper in the 50s and 60s, where we had more widely circulated sexually explicit content to view both through magazines, and then to rent through videos and DVDs and things like that.
Sure.
So I would say in general, looking at nude people and watching people have sex is one thing, right? And
Right.
but the kind of porn, the kinds of sex that teens have access to today is just totally different than, like, say, when I was a teenager, when when we saw porn, it was, nude people in magazines and sexual positions. It was, we joked around like where we were at slumber parties and would try to find the Skinamax channel, and change the channel real quick if we heard like a parent walk by, and so that's softcore porn, obviously. And even in when it was in, like, and it's still is in hotel rooms and things like that, the behaviors were pretty regulated. There's rules about distributing, content. Whereas now it's
Right.
like almost impossible to regulate internet porn
Sure.
because
Anybody
anybody
wants to, anyone with a
camera.
camera and an internet connection can just
Totally. Yeah.
immediately,
And
yeah.
so that means that our teens then have access to all sorts of stuff. So for example, I was talking with someone the other day, who an 18-year-old who was talking about one of his first experiences when he was 13, and he was Googling blowjobs, and he came across like videos of girls like crying while performing oral sex on men because it was so, forceful. And him just being totally freaked out because A, he knew it was violent and wrong, but B, his body was also kind of reacting to it as bodies would. It's
Yeah.
just a
Right.
natural reaction for us to be aroused to seeing, people have sex and just to seeing naked people. That's not part of our, for very simplistic terms, it's not part of our thinking brain. It's a part of our feeling brain. And he had no, education at that point. I mean, even at 18, he's still like, what is that all about? So we know very little about what having access to that kind of sex or, just the craziest stuff that, like, honestly, even if I really even knew about it and wanted to see it as a teenager, I could not have found half of the stuff that you can just see even when you don't want to.
Yeah.
For instance, one of the common genres online on free tube site porn, it's run like YouTube, for listeners who aren't aware, where there's no paywall, and so you can go on and see all sorts of stuff, but it's all like mixed together. So there might be some content on there that shows people engaging in consensual sex in a mutually pleasurable way that's like loving or at least
Maybe with
respectful. Yeah,
condoms.
and even safe. But
Hey, let's do that. Yeah.
yeah, but it might be, alongside videos of, stepdaddy punishing
Yeah. Right.
daughter or, brother sleeping with sister, kind of a, that kind of stuff we couldn't have even found as kids or teens because it's totally illegal to make and distribute anything like that would
Yeah.
insinuate sex with a minor. So anyway, so there's a lot to untangle there in terms of what they're actually seeing. So I would say, putting
Yeah.
my academic hat on, in theory, of course, there's nothing wrong with looking at naked people or even watching people have sex necessarily. Um,
Right.
from just a purely scientific, developmentally natural way, post puberty, we're ready to be sexually aroused. We might not be ready for the complexity of sexual interactions and relationships, but our bodies are getting online for that. And so it's natural, but what they have exposure to is just a whole other beast that makes us sort of concerned about what are the implications of exposure to stuff that we wouldn't necessarily recommend you trying in real life. Certainly not in your first several years of sexual activity.
So you're talking about these tube sites where you can log on for free and just start watching porn. But I mean, is that common? How many people are actually doing that compared to like Netflix or what YouTube or just regular media?
Well, we actually know that people will actually visit Pornhub more than Twitter, Netflix, and Amazon combined. So that's a lot of action. And YouPorn uses 6 times the bandwidth of Hulu. So, I mean, it is just dominate. 30% of the internet is porn. 30% of it. There's so much porn
Wow.
online, we could not live long enough to watch it all. It is just, and so it's not going anywhere. So when I
Yeah,
do
right.
trainings and stuff with parents, they're like, oh, well, I've got all of these filters and I have secured everything, they're good. They're not going to watch it. They don't have access to it. And it's like, that is important to do.
Naive.
It's
Oh, sorry, what?
it's important to do. It's important to do, but it is very, yeah. So you're
Okay.
right. It's very nice. It's important to do for younger kids, but it's completely naive
Yeah,
to
yeah.
think that would be, completely effective at, and that is not the point. The point is not to completely protect them for it. The point is to give them the tools and the skills that they need to live in a world where unlimited porn is at their fingertips at all times.
Right. That actually is gonna that does nothing. If you're actually effective in blocking the porn completely so that they never see it, that's actually maybe the worst thing you could do, because then they have no exposure to it at all. You've taught them nothing about it, and they've learned no skills about how to deal with it or cope with it. And then they're going to go off on their own, and who knows what's going to happen. I mean, that's, I think, a common thread in a lot of parenting right now is just this strong desire to like just protect the kids from getting exposed to any, negative thing. And so, hey, we can just block it. How do we block it? How do we just, stop them from getting access to it? And, probably better to have lots of conversations with them about it and somehow teach them how to regulate themselves, or somehow engage with it in a positive way.
Yeah, I mean, es- so especially with older teens. I mean, so I
Yeah.
do recommend
Yeah,
it.
you got a 6-year-old.
Yeah,
You might want to put a couple of safe
yeah,
filters on there.
because we do know that for the kids under like 13, even under 14, some kids, they've certainly heard about it by that age, but they're not necessarily seeking it out. Or it's important to make sure that you are both sending the message that that these devices are connecting them to the outside world, and that there's content on there that you want to make sure that they don't see, because it might make them feel confused or scared, or what have you. And even if they get through it, they're still sending the message that this is something that we are aware of and doing. But by the time they're like 16 or something, you sort of loosen up a little bit and give them
Right.
more autonomy, and realize like they're going to have to learn how to manage that themselves. And they're pretty soon they're going to be on their
Right.
own. And
Because, I mean, also, if I'm 13 and my parent tells me, oh, there's things out there that, you really shouldn't see. And so we're putting blocking, we got blocking software on there to make sure that you don't see it. I'm immediately, if I haven't already, the first thing I'm going to do is go Google how to hack parent blocking
yeah,
software, figure out what blocking software they're using. I'm sure someone's got a tutorial about exactly how to get around it. I'm sure within about 2 hours I could figure out how to. It's a challenge. It would be fun, honestly, to figure out how to get around it. And then I get to check out all this taboo stuff that my parents just told me was sweet. It must be awesome if they're making such a big deal about it. I don't know.
totally. Yep.
So, it's kind of like, at what point do you, make the shift, or what point do you say, okay, we're taking the blocking off, and then does that like unleash a tidal wave, or is that kind of different for every kid, and you just have to be like really tuned in to kind of where your teenager is in their development? And so how do you,
For sure. It's going to just depend. Some kids can be 15 and, they can make their own food, they can do their own laundry, they turn in their homework on time, they're, dialed in, they're self-regulated, they're on their way to adulthood. And there's other, 20-year-olds who can barely make toast or figure out, they could literally be
yep,
playing, like Fortnite for 48 hours straight with barely taking any time to pee or eat or any, so it totally depends on what their regulation status is. And so parents got to do what works for their families. There is no better way to prepare your kids than through just education and keeping and not freaking out when you do learn of these things that they're doing, so that they know that they can talk to you when there is a problem, when there is like actual violent sex that they've seen, or somebody's asking them to send them videos of themselves, or to video something that they're doing. They're not going to go to a parent who's freaking out about the littlest thing. They're just
absolutely
not. They
not.
know
Yeah.
that they're not going to handle that. Or even a parent who punishes. I know some parents have been like, I found out my kid was using or looking at porn, and I said, if I ever catch you doing this again, no friends for 4 months. And it's like, that really, like, that is not the hill you want to die on. Like,
Yeah, right, right.
you want to. just like you were saying, I mean, making punishments for that kind of thing is only going to make it that much more exciting.
Yeah, I mean, and also you don't really have to do much to make sex more exciting. They talk about the four F's. I mean, it's like the basic survival instincts,
Hmm.
and that's one of them. And it's gonna happen, and they're gonna be drawn to it, which is totally normal
Hmm.
and natural. We're here with Megan Maas talking about her research on sex and pornography. And we're not done yet. Here's a look at what's coming up in the second half of the show.
Because the kids are going to know if you start blushing, about birth control or kissing, they're going to think if they ask you about porn, they're going to give you a stroke. So you're absolutely right in that we are moving away from an abstinence only approach in sex education because the studies show that it just doesn't work. And actually, if your goal is as a family or a parent, if your goal is to have your kid wait until they're married to have sex, or have your kid wait until they're in college or in, a serious committed relationship to have sex, the best thing you can do is make sure they have comprehensive sex education, because that actually requires a ton of vocabulary, lots of skills and comfort with their own body and knowing how their body reacts, and being able to say things like, I'm not okay with oral sex, like I'm okay with touching and making out or something,
What are
but
your
like,
boundaries?
yeah,
But knowing them beforehand and maybe practicing how
yeah,
to advocate for those
totally.
in really difficult
You
situations,
need skills,
probably
yeah,
good.
versus
Yeah,
just
yeah,
saying like, don't do it, because then what happens is they don't have skills to prepare for the situations that they will inevitably be in. And
right.
so when they get in those situations, they're not prepared with contraception. And then it also shows that actually for girls in particular, then they're more likely to have their first sexual experiences are sexual assault or, unwanted experiences, because they have no skills, no preparedness for those situations.
Want to hear the full interview? Sign up for a subscription today. You get unlimited access to all the interviews I've conducted. It's completely affordable, and your subscription helps support the work we do here at Talking to Teens. Thanks for listening. I'll see you next time.